Greetings, Dixwell. It's my pleasure to be a part of Holy Week this year, even if I can't be with you in person. In fact, the fact that we're doing this remotely means I can join you because I'm in California. I've missed you all a great deal since I left Yale Divinity School in 2016 to begin my PhD program at UC San Diego. I'm happy to share that I'm almost finished with my dissertation, and I look forward to coming back to visit you all soon. I'm very sorry to hear that the congregation has lost Jean Bowen and Elsie Blackshear this past year. I have their families in my thoughts and prayers, and I'm also thinking very much about Joyce Pritchard, especially now that I've learned of her recent health challenges. I know that I'm missing a lot more in the way of Dixwell news, but I'll start here. For today's presentation, I have returned to an interview project I began while I was an intern at Dixwell. For this project, I was able to interview Joan Jackson in 2015, and again this past week over the phone. This presentation is dedicated to her. I've done some preliminary research to find images to accompany the stories Joan shared with me, and I hope to continue this research in the future when I might be able to look at Joan's personal photographs as well as archival material at Dixwell. I will include my email address at the end of the presentation in case anyone has questions or additional information they would like to share with me about the complex history of New Haven that I will touch upon through the life of Joan. Bear with me for 1 second while I begin to share my screen. Joan Jackson, A Life of Advocacy. Joan's life, as my title suggests, is one filled with advocacy for social change, especially for children in New Haven. Let's start with Joan's own childhood. When I told Joan that the second interview would focus more on her and less on the history of the Dixwell Church, she said, "I'm not that interesting." So we have to start off today by noting that Joan can sometimes stretch the truth. She was born in New Haven and attended Winchester Elementary School and Bassett Middle School before going to James Hillhouse High. Church life was important to Joan as an adolescent, and while she was always a member of Dixwell UCC, she did have a brief period of curiosity about another religious tradition.
Oh, when I was a teenager, I was going to become a Catholic.
Really?
Because St. Martin's had opened that St. Martin's church that's down the street. It's a Catholic church. There used to be the old police station. And they remodeled it, and it's a Catholic church now. And so I thought that's what I wanted to be. And my father said, well, that was very nice, he said, but I think you really, you like the Latin, and that you would just like the costumes that they wear. And so I did go for a while.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And just on your own?
Huh?
On your own?
Well, it was right down the street. It was right on Dixwell Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was no, and they had nice programs for teenagers. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would go with my friends and everything, But
it's the worst place to run off to than a Catholic church, right?
Right. I mean, nobody,
as a teenager,
they didn't object to my going at all. I mean, it was church. So that was fine. It was no problem.
But it didn't stick for the long term.
No, because my father was right. I was just fascinated because how different from congregational can you get than to be?
That's true.
Yeah. So.
In high school, Joan joined various committees and also enjoyed playing basketball. She said she was not outstanding as a player. She was one of 10 members of Sigma Delta sorority. Her sorority sisters were important friends Joan met in elementary and middle school and would remain her friends long after high school. Joan didn't tell me where she got the nickname Flash, but I'm sure I can ask her another time. The leader of the sorority recruited Joan to work at Edward Malley department store, despite the segregationist hiring policies at the time. At the same time that Joan began working at the store, her father was serving on committees with the governor to help with integration efforts. It is partly because of him that Joan would not back down despite being mistreated by her fellow store employees at Malley's. She says, "If I had backed down, he would have been unhappy about that." The store was not the only place where Joan experienced discrimination. At school, she remembers having only one Black teacher throughout her primary education, her second grade reading teacher. At times in high school, she noticed that her white teachers would not offer help when she sought it. This would change when she went to college. Joan remembers that she was the only member of her sorority to go on to college, not because the other young women didn't want to go or were not capable of pursuing a higher education. It was really a matter of finance, Joan recalls. Joan's mother had not had the opportunity to attend college, while her father had attended Howard until he had to leave unexpectedly because of his father's death. To get an education was so difficult for Black people, said Joan. Very few of us had any kind of income that would allow you to pay for your children to go to school. You know, it was very difficult for my parents. When I tell my kids that my mother sent me $5 every week, and that was the only money that I had, they look at me like I'm crazy. She also remembers that Dixwell's pastor at the time, Reverend Goen, and his wife played an important role in encouraging Joan to go on to St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So do you think if it hadn't been for Reverend Goen's wife that you would have applied to college?
No, I would have applied. I think I applied to UConn. I don't really remember where else. Mm-hmm. And I applied to St. Aug. Mm-hmm. I would have gone somewhere, but but because, you know, Reverend Goen's, Mrs. Goen talked to my mom about it, you know, my mother was always very fond of them.
Yeah.
And they would live right in the neighborhood, you know, so they were, you know, she would, you know, she really took their advice. And I ended up, there was an Episcopal school, you know.
Yeah.
But I went to all their you know, you had to go to chapel and all that.
Okay.
And I had lots of friends that were Episcopalian, so I mean, that didn't bother me at all.
I found, in the course of my research, I found a letter that W.E.B. Du Bois had written to the president of St. Augustine's to ask that he advertise regularly in the crisis. Joan remembers that studying at a historically Black college made a significant difference for her, partly because all of the professors were Black. They have a personal interest in you, she said. If you didn't do well on something, they would tell you to make an appointment. They wanted to talk to you. While the professors were encouraging at St. Augustine's, Joan found the president at the time to be much less so, particularly for female students. After 2 years, Joan decided to leave the school and to return to New Haven, where she married and had her 2 children, Cecile and Armist. Joan never lost touch with her friends despite her 2 years in North Carolina. She said, "Our activities centered around the community. So no matter where you lived, you came down to the Q House for the basketball game on Friday night." Joan met her husband through the men, workers from Winchester Factory, whom her grandmother used to cook for. I guess they got tired of eating in the few little restaurants there were. She called them her boys. She took care of them like they were her own children. After a while, Joan decided that she would need to work to support her family, and around 1968, she began working as a licensed nurse, working at Grace New Haven Community Hospital. She enjoyed the training and later being able to help people as a nurse. She assisted with surgeries and worked with patients in acute care, including one she still remembers vividly because he had been burned and required a striker frame. Joan was a nurse until 2000, but she worked for an even longer period, 40 years, at Dwight School on Edgewood Avenue. She began as a community relations person, doing home visits to parents of children who were having difficulty in school. This job consisted of trying to get parents involved in the schools. There were 14 officers in schools throughout the school district, one for each school. The officers helped to direct families to social services based on economic need or specialized services such as speech pathology. This community-based program, which relied upon community members like Joan, changed when New Haven switched superintendents and began allocating more money for administrators. At this point, Joan's title and role changed, so that rather than going to the homes of students in need, she worked in the classroom to help children learn how to read. As Joan puts it when looking back at this time, they directed the money in a different way. She also noticed a change in teacher training, and she saw more teachers struggling with what teachers call classroom management. Once Joan's own children went off to college, she began to work full-time jobs to help support them. When my children were adults and off to college, then I started working in nursing homes, and that was kind of stressful because I would leave school at 3 o'clock, run home, change my clothes, and then at 4 o'clock, I would go to the nursing home and work until 12. When I think back on it, I just don't know how I did that. And I did that for about 20 years. When I asked Joan what was most gratifying about her work as a nurse and as a school assistant, she recalled the time she spent putting together a mentoring program between Dwight Hall at Yale and Dwight School. The program went on for 10 years, though it has continued on in other forms and even at other schools, as this tutoring program gives us a sense of from the 1980s. The mentoring program at Dwight School started after the riots, when Yale students were being discouraged from coming into Black communities. That's how we started that, to show that you could have integration. One of the mentors Joan remembers well is Dr. Jewel Mullen, who is now Associate Dean for Health Equity at the Dell Medical School of UT Austin. And she speaks publicly about addressing inequalities in the global healthcare system. Joan has seen these racial inequalities all too clearly over the years, especially when her father sought care at the Yale New Haven Hospital. After this time, she began advocating for improved care for Black patients. My conversation with Joan this time ended on the note of friendship. "I'm looking at her picture now," she said, Miss Virginia Holmes. The two friends met in kindergarten and were friends for their whole lives. Joan describes her as kind, gentle, but determined. "When I was in kindergarten, I would always put my boots on the wrong feet, and she would take them off and put them on the right feet. She was 5 years old like me, but she knew her right from left, and I didn't." Virginia worked at Dwight School as a library aide for many years. Her sons, or Joan's godsons, still visit Joan regularly. "She was a beautiful person," says Joan. "Those children loved the library. She really interested them in reading books. It was her kindness. She would sit down and hug them and read a book to them and say, 'Don't you want to take this book home and read it to your mother?' She was a very comforting person. The friendship she shares with Virginia is not Joan's only source of comfort, though.
Yeah.
I know why. I know that, and that Dixwell, just to come and sit. And the only thing I miss about Dixwell is the red velvet seats we used to have in there when I was a
Oh.
kid,
Oh, okay.
because they were comforting.
Joan and I wouldn't have met if it weren't for Dixwell. But we realized that we must have been destined to cross paths, since my grandmother was named Joan Cecilia and Joan's mother was called Cecilia. I've only begun to learn about Joan's very interesting life, but I hope you'll all agree with me that by following her story, we learn about a larger narrative about the struggle for civil rights, like education and healthcare, and how much women like Joan, Virginia, and the women of Dixwell have contributed to these crucial efforts. It may have taken this country a global pandemic to start naming and thanking essential workers, but they have been essential all along. As Shay Esdale, herself a lifelong educator and Dixwell member, shared with me about Joan, Joan and my late sister Charlotte were friends and co-workers at Dwight School. Always honest, hardworking, and hugely supportive, Joan continues to be a light in our world and an illuminator for those who surround her and whom she surrounds. She is a constant who, while embracing change, discerns the wheat and the chaff, holding on to what is good and right, fair, and at times the surreptitious, unexpected. Thank you, Joan, for trusting me with your story and for continuing to live it. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation on women's voices and social change with all of you at Dixwell in the future. May God bring you all a beautiful Easter ahead. Thank you so much, Dixwell. I missed the slide with my email address, but it's just my name, Stacie Voss @gmail. So I would love to hear from any of you, and if you have other questions, I'll also share my home mailing address with Jan. And I really miss you all very much. Happy Easter.